Well, hello there. I would like to introduce our member. Starting with me, I am NURUL SAZALI with ID number 2019732661.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is BUSHRA BINTI NURI. My ID number is 2019728685.
Hello, my name is FAZIMAN bin KHALIL and my matric number is 2019728463.
Hi, my name is RAFIEAH ASRI with ID number 2019584133. Aisyah? Aisyah?
Are you looking for me? Hello everyone, my name is Aisyah binti Mohd Nasir. My matric number is 2019312075. Bye-bye. Bye.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day. My name is NURUL SAZALI and today I would like to discuss the first and the second part of the presentation. So the first part is coverage of the themes and the second part is number and arrangement of the topics. So without further ado, let's take a look on the first part of the slide, which is coverage of the themes from textbook Biology Form 4, KBSM and KSSM. So this is the overview on what I am going to discuss with you guys today. So for KBSM, we have 4 themes with 9 chapters. And KSSM, we only have 2 themes, but it consists of 15 chapters. Now, let's take a look on a deeper view of each theme in each syllabus. So for KBSM, the first theme is Introduction Biology. It consists only 1 chapter, while 7 chapters under first theme of KSSM, which is Fundamental of Biology. So for second theme of KBSM, which is Investigating the Cell as a Basic Unit of Living Things, it consists of 4 chapters, which are Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, and Chapter 5, while 8 chapters under Theme 2 of KSSM, which is Physiology of Humans and Animals. They are Chapter 8, Chapter 9, Chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. For the third themes of KBSM, which is Investigating the Physiology of Living Things, it consists only 2 chapters, which are Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. And another 2 chapters under Theme 4, which is Investigating the Relationship between Living Things and the Environment. The chapters are Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Let's move on to the second part of the slide, which is number and arrangement of the topic. So here I already divided it into 3 points, which are number of theme, the scope and sequence of topic, and balance of depth and breadth. So now let's take a look on the number of themes. As I mentioned before, KBSM has 4 themes and KSSM only has 2 themes. Okay, so for KBSM, the syllabus include humans, animals, and plant, while KSSM only include humans and animals. So for KBSM, it consists only 9 chapters, while KSSM, it consists of 15 chapters. So now we are done with the first point. Let's move on to the second point, which is the scope and sequence of topic. This part will be rough and boring, so bear with me, okay? Here, I already saw it in 2 chapters so that you guys can see it clearly. So, for the first chapter of KBSM, it is located under the first theme, okay? It is entitled Introduction to Biology, while the first chapter of KSSM is called Introduction to Biology and Laboratory Rules. I think there is no significant differences between these 2 chapters. Okay, now let's move on to the second chapter of both syllabus. So under KBSM, second chapter is called Cell Structure and Organization, and the second chapter of KSSM is Cell Biology and Organization. Similar as the first chapter, it don't have any significant differences between these two chapters. Okay, now let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 3. Okay, from the title, you guys can see that there is also no significant changes in both chapter. Alright, there is no significant differences between these. Okay, now let's move on to chapter 4, which is chemical composition of cells. Actually, this chapter is divided into two and was transferred to KSSM chapter 4 and chapter 5. Okay, the writer managed to divide this subtopic into two chapters. Okay, so this is the first division of KBSM chapter 4, which is chemical composition in a cell. Alright, so 4.5 is actually the new subtopic that do not has in chapter 4 KBSM. So now this is the second division of KBSM chapter 4, which is metabolism and enzyme. So here student will learn about enzyme and its metabolism, while KBSM chapter 4 or chapter 5 is called cell division. Okay, this chapter is quite similar to chapter 6 KSSM, which is also cell division. Okay, now let's take a look on chapter 6 of KBSM, which is nutrition. So this chapter is actually has three organisms, which is this is the first part, which is human and animals, and this is the second part of the topic that include plant. Alright, for next chapter, which is respiration, this chapter of KBSM is also divided into two and transferred to chapter 7 and chapter 8 KBSM. Okay, so here is the first division of KBSM chapter 7, which is cellular respiration. Here the student will learn about general knowledge about cellular respiration, aerobic respiration, and fermentation. And then the student will learn about the structure of respiration system in human and animals in chapter 8 KSSM. Alright, so do you notice that there's no knowledge or content about plant in KSSM? As I mentioned before, KSSM do not adapt any plant content in the new textbook. Okay, so for chapter 8 of KBSM, it is about dynamic ecosystem that is included under the fourth theme, and chapter 9 is also adapted in the same theme. Okay, so for chapter 9 of KSSM, it is actually nutrition and the human digestive system. Okay, this chapter is actually KBSM chapter 6. Okay, so I think the writer managed to sort this chapter in the newest syllabus very nice, because can you imagine human's body? So the upper part, okay, respiration is located at the upper part of the human body, while digestive system is located at the lower part of the body. So logically, we will learn about what comes first. So respiration system will come first and digestive system will come later. So yeah, I think that is what the writer of the textbook think. Okay, so that the student can easily understand what they are going to learn in biology form 4. Okay, so the next chapter of KSSM, which is chapter 10, it is actually about transport in humans and animal. This chapter was adapted from Form 5 KBSM textbook chapter 1. Not to forget about this chapter, which is chapter 10, it also adapted from the same chapter. It is about immunity in human, where the student will learn about how our body defends ourselves and about the immune system. Okay, so the next chapter, which is chapter 12, which adapted from Form 5 KBSM chapter 3. It is about coordination and response in human, and also adapted from the same chapter, which is chapter 3, is transferred to chapter 13 and chapter 14. Okay, chapter 13 is called hemostasis and the human urinary system. Okay, and chapter 14 is about support and movement in humans and animals. Okay, for chapter 15, which is the last chapter in KSSM, it is called sexual reproduction, development and growth in humans and animals. Actually, this chapter is adapted from Form 5 KBSM textbook chapter 4. So nowadays, students will learn this at the early stage of their learning process compared to the student back then who were learning under KBSM syllabus. Now we are done with the first and the second part. Now let's take a look on the third part, which is balance of depth and breadth. So before I go deeper, I would like to explain what is the meaning of depth and breadth. So depth is area or specific topic that are focusing on, amplify and explore. Okay, imagine the more deeper you go in a chapter, the more specific or precise knowledge that you will get. While breadth means range of knowledge of a subject. Okay, in one chapter, you can get more knowledge related to this chapter. So this is the difference between KBSM and KSSM that related to balance of depth and breadth. So for KBSM, most of the activities are related to observation, answering question and discussion. Okay, for this syllabus, it focusing on humans, animals and plant concept in most of the chapters. For KSSM, we have hot question, 21st century skills and STEM education. Okay, as I mentioned before, KSSM only focusing on humans and animals concept in most of the chapters. So I think KBSM is more broadened compared to KSSM because the student need to learn 3 organisms in 1 year. Okay, so for KSSM, I think it's more deeper compared to KBSM because they only need to learn about humans and animals. Not only that, we have hot questions that can trigger the curiosity of the students while learning by using this new syllabus. So that's all from me. I'll see you guys in WhatsApp group with a simple question. I hope that you guys can participate in Q&A session for my part. Thank you for listening. Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is BUSHRA BINTI NURI, and I will explain about the third part, which are learning objective and learning outcomes. So, do you notice where these learning objective and learning outcomes in our previous textbook? Yes, basically it is on the first page of every chapter, right? And every chapter has its own learning objective and learning outcomes. So I will explain about the learning objective and learning outcome. So as we can see in the slide, learning objective is a brief, clear, specific statements of what learners will be able to do at the end of a lesson as a result of the activities, teaching and learning that has taken place. Objectives are used to organize specific topics or individual learning activities to achieve the overall learning outcome. So, the content in the lesson should be guided truly from the learning objective. This is because the goal of taking the specific courses is to determine under the condition of what must be performed by the learners. And well-constructed learning objective enable trainers to know what they will teach and deliver the lesson content in providing a uniform understanding. Besides, learning objective should provide clarity about the purpose of the course in a very clean and neat way. So, this may help the trainers easily access what the desired objectives are to teach the students. So, outlining learning objective clearly is purported to help teachers because if they discover that students are regularly not performing well on assessment, they can redesign the course material to better assist the students in the acquisition of the skills listed on the syllabus. So, in order to create clear learning objective, the planning process of a session during a training course serve three main purposes, which are: the first one is give the learners a clear idea of what to expect to learn and what is expected of them after the session. Second, give the the trainer or the educator a goal to achieve in presenting the content of a session. And the third one is forms the basis for evaluating the trainer, learner, and course effectiveness. So, learning objective consists of four components, which are A, B, C, D. So, what is A, B, C, D? So, A refer to audience, which is mean learners for whom the objective is written. So, learning objective should always specify the audience they are intended to serve. Usually, the audience are the students in the class. For example, I give you this phrase, which is learners will be able, and the learners are the audience. So, the objective should describe the exact intent audience. This helps in making the objective become more measurable. Next is behavior. B refer to behavior. What is behavior? Behavior is the action verbs that describe what will the audience able to do. So, to write a clear learning objective, it is important to carefully choose the most appropriate word that describe the behavior displayed by the audience after the training or the lesson is done. So, the action verb that form parts of your objective should be able to fully describe the specific behavior that is expected from an audience after undergoing a lesson. So, example of action verbs that can use include explain, identify, analyze, and present. So, these verbs are the most important part of any learning objective. This is because they identify what has been achieved by the end of the lesson and presumably what they are ready to perform moving forward. So, next is C. C refer to condition. So, condition is the circumstance under which the audience will perform the behavior. So, condition these are the actual conditions a given task should take place. The conditions may include time and place. An example of condition in objective is, for example, I give you this phrase, which is after this lesson, the student should be able to take less than 5 minutes in successfully predicting the performance behavior. So, the phrase here, which is less than 5 minutes, represents the conditions. And lastly is D. D refers to degree. Degree is the acceptable performance of the behavior. So, learning objective also should identify to what degree a given skill or knowledge must be achieved by the learner. In other words, the degree used in objective gives the proficiency to which the lesson will elicit in the learners. It is therefore important for the teachers to give the specific of how a learner will be able to perform a given task in terms of quality and quantity after undergoing a lesson. Okay, so I will give you example of learning objective, which is based on the ABCD technique. So this is example of the learning objective. By the end of the lesson, students should be able to identify the 3 lines of body defense mechanism. So, learning objective always start with the word by the end of the lesson. So, by the end of the lesson is the condition. Students, like I mentioned before, is the audience. Identify is the behavior, and the 3 here means the degree. So this learning objective is measurable as it follows the ABCD technique. Okay, so you guys have understand about the learning objective. So what are learning outcomes? Okay, so I will tell you. Learning outcomes is a statement of what the successful student is expected to be able to do at the end of the lesson. The outcome addresses the educational needs such as knowledge, skill, and or practices that contribute to the professional practice gap, and achieving the learning outcome results in narrowing or closing that gap. So, the learning outcome can access the overall impact of multiple objectives. They focus on the context and potential application of knowledge and skills, help students connect learning in various contexts, and help guide assessment and evaluation. So, good learning outcomes emphasize the application and integration of knowledge. So, instead of focusing on coverage of material, learning outcomes articulate how students will be able to employ the material, both in the context of the class and more broadly. So, um, to write learning outcomes, it must follow the SMART formula. So, what is SMART formula? SMART formula ensure that each item is considered in formulating learning outcomes. So, this table shows the SMART formula. So, S is for specific. Specific here means that it is precisely states what the learner will be able to do. Measurable. Measurable can be observed or counted during or after the training or teaching session. Action-oriented. It uses an active verb that represents a behavior change or acquisition. Reasonable is appropriate to the time and scope. Time-bound. It can be achieved by the end of the training. So, in order to write good learning outcomes, it must follow this SMART formula. I will give you this is example of learning outcomes. Good learning outcome based on the SMART formula. So, the phrase at the end of the lesson, students will be able to describe two components of a plasma membrane and its function based on the fluid mosaic model. So, at the end of the lesson here, refer to the time bound. Describe here refer to the action-oriented, and two components of a plasma membrane and its function based on the fluid mosaic model refer to specific, reasonable, and measurable. So, I can say that this example that I give is good learning outcome. Why? Because first, it is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time frame. Second, the statement describing an intent outcome. Third, it describes intent participant, which is the students, performance by the end of the lesson. Fourth, it describes the learner's performance. Good learning outcomes also should contain the skill or behavior to be performed, a description of the condition under which the student can perform the skills and demonstrate knowledge, the criteria used to measure performance level, and the SMART formula like I mentioned before. So, the skill or behavior to be performed. This component of the outcomes should contain an action verb that relevant to the domain of the activity, which are cognitive, psychomotor, or affective. So it is important to stay away from generic verbs such as understand or know in your outcomes because it's too general. Next is a description of the conditions under which the student can perform the skill and demonstrate knowledge. So, in addition to including an action verb, learning outcome must indicate the condition under which the students will need to demonstrate their knowledge or skills. The criteria used to measure performance level basically based on the level of the Bloom taxonomy, and I will explain further to you. as I explained before in acceptable performance level in the slide before, I said that it is followed the level of Bloom taxonomy. So what is Bloom taxonomy? So basically Bloom taxonomy cognitive domain relates to the level of higher order thinking skill. So higher order thinking skill or HOTS are the ability to apply knowledge, skills and values in reasoning and reflecting to solve problem, make decision, to innovate and create something. High order thinking skill include critical thinking, creative thinking, reasoning, and thinking strategy. As we can see here, from the bottom is the lower order thinking skill and the top is higher order thinking skill. So the most bottom of lower order thinking skill is remembering. What is remembering? Remembering refer to recall specific facts. So example of verbs that used for remembering is define, duplicate, list, or state. Next is understanding. Understanding is grasp meaning of instructional material. So example verb that used for understanding level is classify, describe, discuss, and explain. Next is applying. Applying is use information in a new but similar situation. So verbs that use for this stage is solve, use, demonstrate, and interpret. So next is analyzing. Analyzing is take apart the known and identify relationship. So example of verb that use for this level is differentiate, organize, relate, or compare. Next is evaluating. Evaluating examine information and make judgment. So example of verbs in evaluating level is design, is argue, defend, judge, and select. Lastly is creating. Creating use information to create something new. Example of verb that used for this level is design, construct, develop, and investigate. So example of action verb that I mentioned before must follow used to make learning outcomes must follow this level of Bloom taxonomy. Okay, so I bet that you understand about learning outcome and learning objective. So to make you clear, let me differentiate between these two. So the distinction between learning outcomes and learning objective is not universally recognized. And many instructor or teachers or educator may find that the term learning outcomes describe what they have already understood by the term learning objective. So, what is learning objective? Let me differentiate. So, learning objective is a specific statement of teaching intention, indicates one of the specific areas that the teacher wants to cover, and it gives information about what the teaching of the lesson aim to achieve. And learning outcome is a statement of what a learner should know, understand, and able to demonstrate after complete process of learning. Learning outcome also explain what the learner able to demonstrate after the classroom instruction. So understand guys? So clear, right? So as we know, our government has implemented the new curriculum for the students, which are the KSSM. So because we are from the KBSM era, let's reminiscent about the past. So this table are example of learning objective and learning outcome from the curriculum specification of biology form 4 for chapter 1. So in my opinion, as I said before, learning objective should stay away from generic verbs such as understand. So in KBSM, they use the term understand, which is too generic. To make a good learning objective, we must avoid using understand. Okay, so for the learning outcomes, so the action verb is good, but is not follow the Bloom taxonomy or HOTS level. So this is example of the learning objective and the learning outcomes that I took from the KBSM textbook for chapter 1 only, which are the introduction to biology. In my opinion, the new textbooks are better. Why I say that? This is because, in my opinion, it is more focused and specific to what the learner will be able to do. Since KSSM biology focus on the mastery of knowledge, skill, values that are appropriate to the people's development, learning outcome from the KBSM too general to what the learner will be able to do. In the SKP KSSM biology form 4, each learning area contains content standard, learning standard, and performance standard. The learning area in each theme describe the span of development, knowledge, skills, and value through its content standard, learning standard, and performance standard. So, the standard in the curriculum DSKP document is a statement about what the students need to know and are able to do after learning a topic or a unit in a subject matter. Let me explain about the content standard. Content standard is a specific statement about what pupils or students should know and can do during the schooling period, encompassing the knowledge, skills, and value. So, the content standard has one or more learning standard which collectively form a concept or idea based on the learning area. Teaching and learning needs to be holistic and integrated in order to deliver the scientific concept or principle from a few learning standards to suit people's ability. Learning standards is a predetermined criteria or indicator of the quality in learning and achievement that can be measured for each content standard. So, learning standards are also specific statements about what students should know and can do in terms of knowledge or concepts understood and their ability to master knowledge, skills, and value. Learning standards are also specific statements about what students should know and can do in terms of knowledge or concept understood and their ability to master knowledge, skills, and values in measurable forms. So, learning standards do not show teaching and learning methods, but the goal is that teachers are given the opportunity to use the creativity in the provision of conducive learning environments for students and thus form the concept and develop the skill, attitudes, and values in the subject taught. Learning standards need to be clear because it has more benefit, which is the students and parents will understand the progress expected within each year of schooling. Besides, it is also aspire to further maximize students' outcome within the current budget level. Next is performance standard. Performance standard is a set of general criteria which reflects the level of pupils' achievement that they should show as a sign that a certain topic has been mastered by pupils. So, knowledge and science process skill integrated in the learning area are assessed based on the stated performance standard. Performance standard aims to gauge the achievement of students mastering the specific knowledge, skills, and values. Performance standards are also statements about the level of students' learning progress measured by the standard and also indicate the student's position in the development or progress of his or her learning. So, my question is, why in the SKP they use the term standard instead of learning outcome to describe the outcome? Well, actually, standard is a general statement of the learning outcome of which the instructor needs to know and can do. So, indicator is the outcome of learning subjects for specific level, The purpose of setting standards and indicator of the subject listed in the curriculum document is to determine exactly what the student intend to, and to determine what they need to know, which the concept is. The content of the subject is the thing that a student can do that refers to the skill that she or he needs to master through the context or specific activity. So, generally, in the SKT, the concept or knowledge is an important noun or noun phrase contained in standards and indicators, while skills are usually expressed in the form of verbs. These are examples of content standards and learning standard in biology form 4 KSSM based on the DSKT. So these are the content standard and these are the learning standard. And I only took for chapter 1, Introduction to Biology and Laboratory Rules, because in KSSM there are 15 chapters. It is many for me to explain about all of the chapter. This clear learning standard will help students and teacher to understand the progress expected within each year of schooling. These are the performance standard for chapter 1, and the knowledge and science process skill integrated in their learning area are based on this performance standard. Every people have different types of opinion, and it is same with me. In my opinion, new textbook KSSM are better. Why I say that? Because even the terms are different, but it is still the same. So KSSM was better because it comprised everything. It is specific, measurable and observable, clearly defined and action-oriented. So it is specific because it is clearly and precisely states what the learner will be able to do. And it is measurable and observable because it defines clear, meaningful action verbs on learner parts and embed with knowledge and skill. It clearly defined because it is embedded with knowledge and skill and value that student needs to acquire, and action-oriented. It demonstrates varying level of thoughts and use an active verb that represent a behavior change or acquisition. Learning standards in the KSSM describe the degree of proficiency that students need to display in relation to each of the content standards. So, KSSM Biology focuses on the mastery of knowledge, skills, and values that are appropriate to the student's development. So, the KSSM also defines the achievement level for each content and learning standard clearly based on the performance standard. So, the teacher can assess their students' performance level by this standard. The old textbook, which are KBSM, it does not focus on the importance of students' preparation to face outside worlds, including the employment part. However, in KSSM, it seems to have it because KSSM Biology aims is to develop science literature pupils through learning experience in understanding the biology-related concept, developing skills, using various strategies, and applying the knowledge and skill based on scientific attitudes and values, as well as understanding the impact of science and technological developments in society. That's why I think KSSM is more good and better. So I hope that everyone understand about my explanation. So I have a question. So do you think that learning objective and learning outcomes are vital? And why do you think so? I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Now it's my turn. I want to explain about what is key concept, the importance of key concept, and the difference between key concept in KBSM textbook and in KSSM textbook. Let's go. So, what is key concept? Key concepts are the ideas and understandings that we hope will remain with our students long after they have left school and have forgotten much of the detail. Key concepts sit above context but find their way into every context. Next, what is important of the key concept? The importance of key concept is it helps to develop understanding by offering opportunities to link, review and put knowledge into context. In this way, awareness of key concepts can help deepen learners' knowledge and understanding. Next, the scientific key concept were influenced by the critical reflection. So, what is critical reflection? Let me explain. Number 1, conformity alignment with the curriculum aims and objective in the curriculum guide, accuracy and relevancy of the data information. Third, accuracy, clarity, development of concept. Next, appropriate level of difficulty and inclusion of suggested references to facilitate consolidation and self-directed learning. Next, development of cognitive skills of all levels, especially higher order thinking skill. Next, fostering positive values and attitudes. Next, inclusion of learning activities essential to achieving the learning targets. Next, facilitating students into integrate practice, apply new knowledge. Next, inclusion of learning activities essential to achieving the learning targets. And last but not least, facilitating students to integrate, practice, apply new knowledge. Next, I will explain the special features of the key concepts in KSSM and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, we have 4 special features which are represent the key concepts in KSSM textbook. Number 1 is biological lens, which means additional information related to the theories and the concept. Second, STEM bulletin, which define highlight current development in the related field of science and technology. Third, Our World of Biology, which define illustrate the application of theories and concept that learn in everyday life. The last one is millennial career, which describe the careers related to a concept or theories. Next, the special features in KBSM textbook that represent the key concept, which are number 1, biofact, which define, provide supplementary and current information. Next, bio in action, which defines exposes students to the application of biological concepts in everyday life. The third one is career close-up, which provide interesting information about the relevant career options related to biology. And last but not least, close to biology, physics and chemistry, which are show the links between biology and the other fields. Now let's proceed with chapter 1. The main topic in chapter 1 is Introduction to Biology and Laboratory Rules. As for KSSM textbook, in this KSSM textbook, the topic will divide into 2, which are Introduction to Biology and Laboratory Rules. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, it only states Introduction to Biology, but not stress more on laboratory rules. So now, let's take a look at the difference between KHSM and KBSM for Chapter 1. In KHSM Chapter 1, it only has 1 key concept, which is biological lens. And in KBSM, it contains 2 key concepts, which are career close-up and biofacts. Now, let's proceed with Chapter 2. The main topic for KSSM textbook is Cell Biology and Organization. And as for KBSM textbook, its main topic is Cell Structure and Cell Organization. Now, I will explain the difference of key concept for Chapter 2 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, there is no key concept. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, it has 6 key concepts. 5 of it are biofacts, meanwhile 1 of it are connect to physics. Now, let's move to Chapter 3. As for KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook, the topic is remain the same, which is movement of substances across a plasma membrane. Next, I will explain about the difference of key concept for Chapter 3 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it contains 4 key concepts, whereas 2 of it are biological lens, 1 of it is millennial carrier, and the other one is our world of biology. And as for KBSM textbook, it contains 3 key concepts. 2 of it are biofacts and the other one is about bio in action. Next, we proceed with Chapter 4. The main topic for KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook remain the same, which is chemical composition in a cell. Next, I will explain about the difference of key concept for Chapter 4 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it contains 4 key concepts, which are 2 of it are our world of biology and the other 2 are biological lens. And as for KBSM textbook, it contains 9 key concepts, whereas 8 of it are biofacts and the other one is connect to physics. Now, let's proceed with Chapter 5. Chapter 5 contains metabolism and enzyme as for KSSM textbook. Meanwhile, there is no topic about metabolism and enzyme in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain about the difference of key concept for Chapter 5 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it only contains 1 key concept, which is biological lens. And as for KBSM, there's no topic, so there's no key concepts. Now, let's proceed with topic cell division. While there are 2 different chapters, alright, let me explain. In KSSM textbook, topic cell division is under Chapter 6. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, topic cell division is under Chapter 5. Did you get it? Now, I will explain the difference of key concept for topic cell division in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. In KSSM textbook, it only has 1 key concept, which is our world of biology. But in KBSM textbook, it also has 1 key concept, which is biofacts. Okay guys, we are halfway there. We are already at Chapter 7. Alright, the main topic for Chapter 7 are cellular respiration in KSSM textbook and respiration in KBSM textbook. Now, I will explain the difference of key concept in 2 topics, which are the cellular respiration topic and respiration topic in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, there is no key concept. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, it contains 8 key concepts. Alright, and 7 of it are biofacts. Meanwhile, the other one is bio in action. Now, let's take a look at Chapter 8. The main topic is respiratory system in humans and animals for KSSM textbook. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, there's no topic respiratory system in humans and animals. Now, I will explain the difference of key concept in Chapter 8 for KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. In KSSM textbook, there is only 1 key concept. It is biological lens. But for KBSM textbook, there is no key concept because this topic not exist in the KBSM textbook. But the Chapter 8 in KBSM textbook is dynamic ecosystem, different with the Chapter 8 for KSSM textbook, which is the respiratory system in human and animal. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept in Chapter 8 for KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. In KSSM textbook, there is no key concept because this topic not exist in the KSSM textbook. Meanwhile, for KBSM textbook, it contains 2 key concepts, which both of them are biofacts. Now, let's proceed with the next chapter, which is Nutrition and the Human Digestive System for KSSM textbook, which is under chapter 9. As for KBSM textbook, the topic of nutrition is under chapter 6. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept in topic nutrition for KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. In KSSM textbook, it contains 4 key concepts, whereas 2 of it are biological lens and the other 2 are millennial carrier. As for KBSM textbook, it contains 9 key concepts, whereas 6 of it are biofacts and the other 3 are bio in action. Now, let's proceed with the chapter 9 for KBSM textbook. The topic is endangered ecosystem. Now, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 9 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, there is no key concept because this topic not exist in the KSSM textbook. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, there are 5 key concepts, whereas 4 of the key concepts are biofacts and the other one is bio in action. Next is chapter 10. The main topic is transport in humans and animal in KSSM textbook, but this topic not exist in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 10 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, there are 3 key concepts, whereas 2 of it are Our World of Biology and the other one is STEM Bulletin. And as for KBSM topic, there is no key concept because this topic does not exist in the KBSM textbook. Now, let's proceed with chapter 11. The main topic is immunity in humans. It only contained in KSSM textbook, not KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 11 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, there is only 1 key concept, which is Our World of Biology. Meanwhile, in KBSM textbook, there is no key concept because this topic not relevant in KBSM textbook. Next is chapter 12. The main topic is coordination and responses in humans. It contained in KSSM textbook but not in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 12 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it contains 4 key concepts, whereas 2 of it are Our World of Biology, 1 of it is biological lens and the other one is millennial carrier. As for KBSM, there's no key concept because this topic is not relevant in KBSM textbook. Next, let's proceed with chapter 13. The main topic is homeostasis and the human urinary system. It only relevant in KSSM textbook, meanwhile not relevant in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 13 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it only has 1 key concept, which is Our World of Biology, but in KBSM, there is no key concept because this topic is not relevant for KBSM textbook. Now, let's proceed with chapter 14. The main topic is support and movement in humans and animals, and this topic only relevant in KSSM textbook, not relevant in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 14 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it only contains 2 key concepts, which are STEM Bulletin and millennial carrier. As for KBSM textbook, there is no key concept because this topic is not relevant in KBSM textbook. Last but not least, chapter 15. The main topic is sexual reproduction, development and growth in humans and animals, and this topic is only relevant in KSSM textbook but not relevant in KBSM textbook. Next, I will explain the difference of key concept for chapter 15 in KSSM textbook and KBSM textbook. As for KSSM textbook, it only contains 2 key concepts, which are biological lens. As for KBSM textbook, there's no key concept because this topic is not relevant in KBSM textbook.
Hello everyone, it's me Aisyah. So, you have done with the themes, topics, learning objective and also key concept. Now, I would like to explain to you on common experiments and activities performed for students throughout this biology KSSM textbook. As we are the generation of KBSM, do you remember our textbook? Well, before this, if you remember, we actually have two books for biology subject, which are textbook and also practical book. However, now, in KSSM, we have only one textbook that have everything inside it, which is more easier for the students to bring it to the school, right? Before I start explaining the experiment, I would like to ask you one more question. So have you ever thought the importance of experiment and activities suggested in the textbook? Well, experiments and activities, especially in KSSM textbook, can help to improve high-order thinking skill of the students. Plus, it helps to inculcate scientific attitude and develop novel values in the student. In KSSM textbook, rather than teacher guide the experiment, students are given the opportunity to design scientific investigation and experiment by themselves. Students are expected to plan and design the experiment, collect and analyze the data, interpret and display results, and finally share and present their reports and findings. There are many experiments, projects, and activities suggested in the textbook. However, there are only a few experiments that are compulsory and must be conducted using inquiry approach as mentioned in the DSKP. We will see which experiments are compulsory as we go through the textbook. Let's go. In the first chapter, there are only one experiment suggested, which is to study the effects of an activity on students' pulse rate. This is a good introduction experiment as students can experience this experiment by themselves, which make it more interesting. It is a good upgrade from KBSM as in KBSM, the experiment is to study the fitness level of students which more to teacher-guided experiment. Plus, it requires more apparatus and time to conduct this experiment. Next, throughout KSSM Chapter 1, there is only one suggested activities in the activity zone box, which students need to find information on handling accident in laboratory set using external resource. It is very interesting as they can acquire knowledge from useful and informative resource. And based on my observation, there is one experiment suggested in KBSM that was eliminated in KSSM as it is not related to this chapter. Moving on to chapter 2, there are two compulsory experiments. Both experiments are related to each other. First is experiment on preparing and examining slide of plant cell. In this experiment, students will be able to learn the irrigation techniques, which is a very important technique in preparing slide of any sample. Meanwhile, activity 2.2 is experiment on preparing and examining slide of animal cell, which also use the irrigation technique that need to be learned in the previous experiment. Both experiments helps the student to identify and comparing the structure of animal and plant cell based on observation through a light microscope. This is one of the compulsory experiments as mentioned in the SKP. Through this experiment, students will be able to prepare their own slide for observation in the future using a light microscope. Plus, they are able to understand the characteristics of animal and plant cells more through their own observation. These two experiments were also in KBSM practical book. Next, for the activity zone in KSSM, it suggested the students to examine the living process of unicellular organisms such as amoeba species and paramecium species. And for your information, there are about 5 activities suggested from Chapter 2 KBSM were not carried forward to KSSM textbook. Then, Chapter 3 contains 4 compulsory experiments that need to be done by the student, which are Activity 3.1, Activity 3.2, Activity 3.3 and also Activity 3.4. For Experiment 3.1, students need to do experiment to study the movement of substances across a selectively permeable membrane. Students will be able to know that small molecules such as glucose are able to move across a selectively permeable membrane, while large molecules such as starch are not. Consequently, by conducting this experiment, students can relate the finding with the characteristic of plasma membrane, as the whisking tube used in this experiment represent the plasma membrane. In Activity 3.2, students need to conduct experiment on studying the movement of substances across whisking tube using a simple osmometer. Unlike the previous experiment, this experiment aimed to study on the water molecule permeability across the whisking tube, which relate to the permeability of water in the plasma membrane. In Activity 3.3, students need to conduct experiment to study the effect of hypotonic, hypertonic and isotonic on animal cell. It is very interesting as students can observe how the animal cells are in form of normal, shrink and also burst state due to the process of hemolysis and crenation. Next, Activity 3.4 is about the same with Activity 3.3. But rather than studying the effect of hypotonic, hypertonic and isotonic on animal cell, this experiment focuses on plant cell. Students will know the term of turgid and flaccid to show the condition of a plant cell in this experiment. Students will also relate their data to determine the phenomena involved by the plants, whether the plant cells undergo plasmolysis or deplasmolysis. Experiment 3.1 to 3.4 are indeed deserve to be chosen as compulsory experiment, as students can relate the knowledge and information from this experiment with their daily life and use it throughout this biology subject. Next, in Activity 3.5, students need to conduct an experiment to determine the concentration of extracellular solution, which is isotonic to the cell sap of a plant. It is a very simple and interesting experiment, as students will see the difference in mass of potato stripe in different concentration of sucrose solution. Activity 3.1 to 3.5 in KSSM were also suggested in KPSM. Activity 3.6 in Chapter 3 KSSM suggested the student to do project in a group work to apply the concept of movement of substances across the plasma membrane for them to understand better. Meanwhile, in KBSM before, teachers are the one who need to divide the student into group to conduct role play to show the movement of substances across the plasma membrane, which is not a good way to improve student thinking skill and creativity. In addition, there are 3 suggested activities in the activity zone box throughout this chapter for the student that may help them to understand more on this topic. Moving on to Chapter 4 KSSM, the chemical composition in a cell. Surprisingly, there is no experiment in this chapter. However, there is one activity suggested in the activity zone, which students may design an experiment to ascertain the presence of reducing sugar and non-sugar sucrose. In contrast, in KBS and before, the experiment of the presence of reducing sugar and non-sugar sucrose were explained in detail. I think that it is good to eliminate the experiments detail in the KSSM textbook, as students need to find out the experiment by themselves, which increase their high order thinking skill, as KSSM is more to student-centered learning. Plus, there are some experiments in Chapter 4 KBSM were eliminated in Chapter 4 KSSM, as it is not suitable to put under this chapter. Some of the experiments from Chapter 4 KBSM were put under other chapters of KSSM textbook, such as in Chapter Enzymes. Chapter 5 is a new chapter that is introduced in KSSM. According to my observation, there are 2 experiments for this chapter. In Activity 5.1 suggested the students to conduct experiment to study the effect of temperature on the amylase enzyme activity. It is very interesting as this experiment will help the student to understand the effect of temperature on starch hydrolysis. Meanwhile, Activity 5.2 is an experiment to study the effect of pH on the pepsine enzyme activity. Like I said earlier, Chapter 5 KSSM, which is the metabolism and enzyme, is a newly introduced topic. So based on my observation, both of these experiments in this Chapter 5, which is Activity 5.1 and 5.2 in KSSM, is from Chapter 4 KBSM under Chemical Composition of the Cell. It is a good upgrade as it is more suitable to put under this new chapter rather than in previous KBSM. Another suggested activity in KSSM Chapter 5 is students may collect information on the enzyme from external resource to improve their understanding. Next, in Chapter 6, Cell Division in KSSM, there is also no experiment suggested. However, there is one activity suggested in the activity zone to the student, whereas student can make a thinking tool to compare and contrast between meiosis and mitosis, which is the most important process in cell division. However, as you can see in the slide, in KBSM Chapter 5 of Cell Division, there are about 7 activities suggested that were eliminated on KSSM. This is because, based on my observation, experiment on cell division is quite lengthy and complicated to conduct. Rather than experiment, students may search for other resources to understand better, such as through video, pictures, or any other resource. Moving on to Chapter 7, Cellular Respiration. Activity 7.1 suggested to study on aerobic respiration. However, it is not compulsory experiment to the teacher to conduct the experiment as it takes more time and more complicated. This experiment was also suggested in KBSM. Next, Activity 7.2 suggested the teacher to conduct a group project for the student to be innovative and creative in implementing their knowledge on producing and introducing fermented food products based on what they have learned before. Then, Activity 7.3 suggested the students to conduct experiment to study the process of yeast fermentation. Again, it is not compulsory experiment as mentioned in the SKP. This experiment was also suggested in KBSM to improve their knowledge on this chapter. For the activity zone in this chapter, there is only one suggested activity. It suggests the student to discuss about the energy requirement in the metabolic process among themselves. Through discussion, students may gain a lot of benefit, especially improving their thinking skill, develop confidence in themselves, and have higher understanding on this topic. Moving on to Chapter 8, Respiratory System in KSSM. This chapter also do not have any experiment. However, there are 3 interesting activities suggested to help the students to understand better, as you can see in the slide. In contrast, in KBSM Chapter 7 Respiration, there are about 7 activities suggested which consist of experiment, simulation, and observation activities. However, based on my observation, all of the activities are low-order thinking skill activities. Teacher may use another activity to help the student understand better for this topic. Next, in Chapter 9 KSSM, Nutrition and Human Digestive System. In Activity 9.1 is compulsory experiment that need to be done by the student to study the digestion of starch in a food sample. Student will be able to see a reaction occur to the food sample when it tests out by using iodine solution and also Benedict solution. It is a quite simple experiment. Then, Activity 9.2 is also compulsory experiment, which student will be able to study the digestion of protein in food sample in the experiment. They will see the clarity or turbidity in the sample food throughout this experiment. Moving on to activity 9.3. This experiment aims to study the digestion of lipids in food sample. It is a very interesting and simple activity as students will see the lipid indicator to turn from pink to colorless in the presence of lipid. Again, this experiment also a compulsory experiment mentioned in the SKP. As I look back in KBSM practical textbook, activity 9.1 to 9.3 in KSSM is compiled together as one activity, which is activity 6.2 in KBSM. The experiment is about the same. Another compulsory experiment in KSSM is activity 9.4. Students need to do experiment to study the energy value of food sample. It is quite complicated experiment, however, it is very important knowledge and experience for the student to experience it. This experiment was also suggested in KBSM in activity 6.1 as I show in this slide. Next, another compulsory experiment is activity 9.5, which students need to conduct experiment to determine the content of vitamin C in fruit juice and vegetable juice. This is also an interesting yet knowledgeable experiment as students will be able to know which juice has the most vitamin C. Other than see the transformation of color of the indicator, students also will be able to learn on how to calculate the vitamin C concentration by using the formula given. It is very important for the student to be able to interpret and analyze their own data. And again, this experiment was also suggested in KBSM practical book in activity 6.3. The last compulsory experiment suggested in chapter 9 KSSM aim to study the effect of temperature on vitamin C in orange juice. This is a fascinating and simple experiment as students will be able to know suitable ambient temperature to keep orange juice, which they can apply it in their daily life. Surprisingly, based on my observation in KBSM practical book, there are a lot of activities suggested under this topic. However, they are eliminated and not carried forward to KSSM textbook as most of them are repeated experiment from other chapter and not suitable to put under this chapter. Chapter 9 KSSM also suggests students to do some extra activities to have deeper understanding about this topic. In my point of view, most of the activities suggested, as you can see in the slide, need the student to obtain information from external resource, which is a very good step to help the student to gain interest to this topic. Now, let us move on to chapter 10 KSSM, which is transport in human and animal. In this chapter, there are no experiments suggested. However, there are a few suggested activities mentioned in the activity zone throughout this chapter. All of the suggested activities require the student to work in group and discuss the information among themselves, which indeed one of the strategies to implement student-centered learning in the classroom. Next, in chapter 11, also there is no experiment suggested, but there is one suggested activity, which the students need to list the physical and chemical defenses found in the first line defense. The information required will help them to understand better on this immunity topic. Next, chapter 12, coordination and response in humans. Again, this chapter also does not have experiment. However, it suggested the student to do research study on the traditional method such as acupuncture and reflexology in treatment of health issue related to the nervous system. This is a good and interesting research study suggested as people nowadays use alternative method to treat their body. Thus, students can know the benefit and how the traditional method works on our body. Another suggested activity in activity zone suggests the student to do role play simulation and also drawing, as you can see in this slide. Moving on to chapter 13, activity 13.1 is the last compulsory experiment that the student need to conduct as mentioned in the SKP. This experiment aims to study the effect of consuming different volume of water on urine production. This experiment requires more time to complete. However, this is a very interesting experiment as it relates with our daily life. Students will be able to understand the relationship between volume of water they consume and the urine production. Activity 13.2 is not an experiment, but is suggested to collect information from external source. Students need to collect information about hemodialysis and also may carry out activity to respond for hemodialysis. Teachers may help the student by facilitating their activities accordingly. Next, there is no experiment in chapter 14. However, there are a lot of activities suggested in the activity zone that can be done by the student and the teacher to understand this topic better. Last chapter, which is chapter 15, also does not have any experiment. Students may discuss the answers to the question given in the activity zone as shown in the slide for them to understand this topic better. Although some of the chapters in this textbook did not have any experiment, every subtopic in this textbook is given a formative practice. There are many questions given in order to test the students' understanding at the end of every subtopic, which is written in the formative practice box. Other than that, there are also summative practice at the end of every chapter throughout this textbook. Students may test their understanding and prepare themselves for examination by completing this summative practice. Lastly, the most exciting part that I would like to share throughout my observation in KSSM Biology Form 4 textbook, there are actually a lot of QR code given in this textbook. This QR code actually can be scanned by the student to watch video, do quizzes, and also do activities to improve their understanding. And even all of the answers for summative practice can be obtained by scanning the QR code at every end of the summative practice page. It's very cool, right? And not to mention, the step to scan the QR code is given at the beginning page of the textbook to make it easier to use for the student. I definitely love this new textbook as it is a very technology friendly and the activities suggested is more on student-centered learning, which is a very good step in order to improve our student high thinking skill and develop STEM interest among our students, especially in this 21st century. With the introduction of KSSM Biology textbook, students are given the opportunity to design scientific investigation and experiment beside the usual teacher-guided scientific investigation and experiment in KBSM before. In conducting experiment in KSSM, student does not only observe the data, but they need to interpret the data, identify the variable, making inference, and do discussion on every experiment, which is very important to make them to understand every concept in biology. Well, biology is a very great subject. I think that's all from me. With that, I end with thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohd FAZIMAN bin Mohd KHALIL. So, today I will be presenting about possible misconception in biology KSSM Form 4. So, what is misconception? Based on general definition from Oxford Language Dictionary, it is a view or opinion that is incorrect based on faulty understanding. Basically, it is an incorrect idea which came from lacking of scientific evidence and knowledge and therefore created incorrect understanding about the idea. Next is types of misconception. As already presented by previous group, I will just go through briefly about this point. There are 5 types of misconception, which are preconceived notion, non-scientific belief, conceptual misunderstanding, vernacular misconception, and factual misconception. So what is preconceived notion? It is an opinion formed beforehand without adequate evidence or lacking of evidence. Non-scientific belief is an idea learned from sources than scientific inquiry, such as religious, mystical, pseudoscience, and superstition. And conceptual misunderstanding is a misunderstanding between scientific information with preconceived notion and non-scientific beliefs, which is from religious or superstition. And vernacular misconception is the use of words that mean one thing in everyday life but different meaning in a scientific concept. And lastly is factual misconception, which is learned from early age and passed down from generation to another generation. For example, superstition. Next, I will be explaining about misconception based on education point of view, which is student misconception situation. There are 3 types of situation, which are before learning the topic, while learning the topic, and after learning the topic. The letter B, W, and A, as you can see in the slide, will serve as situation indicator for misconception in the chapter that I will discuss later on. So, the best way to deal with misconception is, first, you need to find the misconception by asking the student before learning the topic, while learning the topic, and after learning the topic. Next, confront the misconception by discussing the misconception with the student. And lastly, reconstruct the misconception by correct the misconception with scientific evidence and facts. Next, I will be explaining about one misconception in every chapter in Biology KSSM Form 4. There are 15 chapters in Biology KSSM Form 4. Next, I will proceed to chapter 1, which is Introduction to Biology and Laboratory Rules. So, the misconception in this chapter is fume hood and laminar flow cabinet are the same laboratory equipment. Usually, the student have this misconception after learning the topic in an exam. So, actually, fume hood and laminar flow cabinet are not the same laboratory equipment. The student got confused in the exam with the function of these 2 laboratory equipment, and maybe also the structure of these 2 laboratory equipment are quite similar. So actually, the function of fume hood is to avoid breathing in hazardous gases of dangerous chemical, and the function of laminar flow cabinet is to provide a flow of filtered air for a clean work area. Okay, next proceed to chapter 2, which is cell biology and organization. So the misconception in this chapter is cell wall and cell membrane are the same structure. Usually the student have this misconception after learning the topic in an exam. So actually, cell wall and cell membrane are not the same structure. Cell wall is only present in the plant cell, but cell membrane is present in both plant cell and animal cell. And cell membrane is also known as plasma membrane. In the textbook, it only mentions the name of plasma membrane, but do not mention the other name, which is cell membrane. So therefore, in the exam, the student can get confused when they do not familiar with the name of cell membrane and they thought the cell membrane is the same structure as cell wall. Okay. Next, I will proceed to chapter 3, which is movement of substances across the plasma membrane. So the misconception in this chapter is water move from the hypotonic solution to the hypertonic solution. Usually the student have this misconception after learning the topic in an exam. For example, the question here, what will happen to the cell volume if a cell with internal concentration of 0.9% solid concentration is placed in a solution of 1.5% solid concentration? So most of the student will answer water will move into the cell and the cell will burst. And the answer is actually wrong. So by definition, tonicity is the ability of a solution surrounding a cell to cause the cell to gain or lose water, which involves osmosis, or diffusion of water. So the right answer for this question is the solution of 1.5% solid concentration is actually high solid concentration but low water concentration. So therefore the solution is hypertonic solution, and the cell with internal concentration of 0.9% solid concentration is actually low solid concentration but high water concentration. Therefore the cell is in hypertonic condition. So the water in the cell will move out and the cell will lose water. For example here, red blood cell, which is red blood cell placed in a hypertonic solution, and the water will move out from the cell by osmosis and will cause the cell to shrink. And the red blood cell will undergo crenation. Okay, next is chapter 4, which is chemical composition in a cell. So the misconception of this chapter is genes are made up only from DNA. Usually the student have this misconception before learning the topic, which is they learn from lower form. So actually genes are made up from DNA or RNA. So DNA is actually serve as a template for RNA to translated into amino acid which produce certain protein in the body. Therefore RNA is also a part of the genes. Okay, next is chapter 5, which is metabolism and enzymes. So the misconception of this chapter is optimal temperature for enzyme reaction is 37 degrees Celsius. Usually the student have this misconception after learning the topic in an exam. So actually optimal temperature for enzyme reaction of 37 degrees Celsius is for human body. So enzyme can be found in various of organisms which can exist in extreme temperature and do not have constant body temperature. Therefore, optimal temperature for enzyme reaction of other organisms can be different from human. Okay, next is chapter 6, which is cell division. The misconception of this chapter is DNA replication occurs in the prophase during the cell division. Actually, DNA replication does not occur in the prophase during the cell division. The DNA replication occur in S phase of interphase. The student got confused because the student focus more on the mitosis and meiosis cell cycle. Okay, next proceed to chapter 7, which is cellular respiration. So the misconception of this topic is plant undergo photosynthesis to obtain energy. Usually the student have this misconception while learning the topic. As you can see in the picture, the process of photosynthesis absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce oxygen and glucose. Okay. Actually, plants undergo photosynthesis and cellular respiration to obtain energy. In the textbook, it only mentioned about plants undergo photosynthesis process to produce glucose. The student can have misunderstanding about plants undergoes photosynthesis process to produce glucose, and the student can misinterpret that glucose is a form of energy. Actually, plant undergoes photosynthesis by absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce oxygen and glucose, and then this oxygen and glucose used by the plants to make ATP or energy in cellular respiration. Okay, proceed to chapter 8, which is respiration system in humans and animals. Okay, the misconception of this chapter is respiratory system is same as cellular respiration. The student usually have this misconception while learning the topic of chapter 7 and chapter 8. Okay, actually respiratory system is not same as cellular respiration. Respiratory system is breathing mechanism of human body, and cellular respiration is a process of a cell to make energy. The student usually got confused because of the words of respiratory system and cellular respiration is almost the same. Okay, next I will proceed to chapter 9, which is nutrition and the human digestive system. So the misconception of this chapter is digestion process begin in the stomach. The student have this misconception before learning the topic, which is they have pre-knowledge of this topic when in lower form. Okay, actually digestion process does not begin in the stomach. As the textbook mentioned, the digestive process begins in the mouth, which the presence of food stimulates the secretion of saliva, which mostly digests carbohydrates, and then the digestion process continue in the stomach. Okay, next is chapter 10, which is transport in humans and animals. Okay, the misconception of this chapter is all arteries carry oxygenated blood and all veins carry deoxygenated blood. The student have this misconception after learning the topic, which is in the exam. So as the textbook mentioned, coronary arteries transport oxygenated blood and coronary veins transport deoxygenated blood. Okay, next. Actually, not all arteries carry oxygenated blood and not all veins carry oxygenated blood. Others artery carry oxygenated blood except for pulmonary artery, which transport the oxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and other veins carry the oxygenated blood except for pulmonary veins, which is transport oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. The student got confused because they don't remember the exception of pulmonary artery and pulmonary veins. Okay, proceed to chapter 11, which is immunity in humans. So, the misconception in this chapter is all bacteria are pathogens. The student have this misconception after learning the topic in an exam. So actually, not all bacteria are pathogens. As you can see in the slide, the textbook mentioned that examples of pathogen include bacteria, singular bacterium, viruses, and parasite. The student with lacking of knowledge related to this topic can make generalization that all bacteria are pathogen. Actually, most bacteria are harmless. Bacteria help us in digest food, produce vitamin, and act as fermenting agent in food preparation. Okay, next is chapter 12, which is coordination and response in humans. So the misconception of this chapter is hormones are only testosterone and estrogen. The student have this misconception before learning the topic, which is they have pre-knowledge about this topic when they learn in lower form, and they have pre-knowledge about this topic from other sources. Actually, hormones are not only testosterone and estrogen. There are many hormones which is secreted in two parts of pituitary gland, which are posterior lobe and anterior lobe. Posterior lobe secreted antidiuretic hormone, which is stimulate reabsorption of water in kidney, and oxytocin hormone, which is stimulate contraction of uterine muscles and production of milk. And anterior lobe secreted luteinizing hormone that stimulates secretion of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Growth hormone, which is stimulate growth, protein, and fat metabolism. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is stimulate adrenal cortex to secrete other hormones. Thyroid stimulating hormone, which is stimulate thyroid to secrete thyroxine. And follicle stimulating hormone, which is stimulates spermatogenesis and development of follicles in the ovary. Okay, next chapter is chapter 13, which is homeostasis and the human urinary system. So the misconception about this chapter is negative feedback is bad for the body. The student have this misconception while learning the topic. Actually, negative feedback is involved in homeostatic mechanism. So, negative feedback is not bad for the body. The student got confused because the word of negative, which is the student think that negative feedback is bad for the body. Negative simply mean that feedback loop works to counter the stimulus, which is the homeostatic mechanism works to counter the stimulus to balance the internal environment of the body. Okay, let's proceed to second last chapter, which is chapter 14, support and movement in humans and animals. So the misconception about this topic is osteoporosis affect only old people. Young people do not need to be concerned about the osteoporosis. The student have this misconception after they learn the topic. So as you can see in the slide, the textbook mentioned that osteoporosis is common among women who reach menopause, and the age of women who reach menopause usually the age of 40 and above, which are old people. So osteoporosis affect only old people, and young people need to be concerned about it. As you can see in the slide, according to the article, scientists realized that important for young people to take care of their bone because it can influence the onset of osteoporosis in their later life. So the young people need to regularly exercise, have good nutrition, and also adequate calcium intake, which are to prevent osteoporosis. Okay, lastly, let's proceed to the last chapter, which is chapter 15, sexual reproduction, development and growth in humans and animals. So the misconception about this chapter is the male students thinks that females urinate through the vagina. They have this misconception before they learn this topic, which is they learn in the lower form, and they have this misconception while learning the topic, as you can see in the picture of the textbook. Okay, let's proceed. So actually, females do not urinate through the vagina. For men, both semen and urine pass through the same urethra. But for females, urethra, it is not connected to their vagina opening. As you can see in the picture, the female urethra is located above the vagina opening, and the two pathways are not connected. Okay, before I end my presentation, I have one question for group 6. Give and elaborate one possible misconception in any chapter related to biology form 4 KSSN other than I mentioned in the video. Okay, the conclusion for my presentation is misconception is normal experience for students and need to be corrected properly to make sure effective process of learning. So I hope all of you can get significant input from my presentation. I hope all of you are doing fine, and I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, so our group had already explained well on the curriculum specification Biology Form 4. So in conclusion, all the scope in KBSM are much differ from the new syllabus, which is KSSM. Okay, so for the coverage of the themes, KBSM has 4 themes with 9 chapters and KSSM has 2 themes with 15 chapters. So, KSSM themes provide basic scientific understanding regarding biology through inquiry and scientific investigation, and it also emphasizes on the understanding physiological processes, the knowledge about personal care, and the development of science and technology. Okay, next is numbers of topic. KSSM is more organized than KBSN because it separates the plant-related chapters into Form 5 textbooks. Next is learning objective and learning outcome. So these learning objective and learning outcomes are important to teachers and students because it can guide both teachers and students in teaching and learning process. Even the terms are different, KSSM has good and more focus because it's specific to what the learner will be able to do. Since KSSM biology focuses on the mastery of knowledge, skills, and value that are appropriate to the student's development. And for scientific key concept helps to develop students' understanding in learning. This promotes self-directing learning with the keywords, online sources of the content, and biology facts. For common experiment and activities, in KSSM, it is a teacher-guided scientific experiment, and in KSSN, it changed from the teacher-guided scientific experiment to inquiry approach experiment, which is more to student standard. And carrying out scientific experiment encourage peoples or students to cultivate thinking skills, science process skill, and manipulative skills. And lastly is the possible misconceptions. So misconception is a normal process of learning, and the best way to deal with misconception is to find them, confront them, and reconstruct them. So that's all from our group. Thank you.